Tim here. I'm back for another episode, a big one this time around, and appropriately so. I'll talk if you'll listen. Episode 40, the big 40. Who would have thought that I would have made it this far? And it'd be really easy to sit back and go, hey, I should have 50 episodes out. Hey, I should have 60 episodes out. I should have 100 episodes out. I'm proud to be at 40. I'm appreciative to be at 40. And I know the most difficult thing you can do with anything in life, especially a hobby, especially something that you're not being paid to do, is to get started. To get started is the most difficult thing that you can do. And I'm happy to be here at episode 40. Now, anyone who knows me personally and or anyone who has been listening for a while, they know that generally speaking, I am a sincere person. I'm a happy-go-lucky guy, and I try my best to be as lighthearted and as friendly as possible because I believe that's what people are most receptive to. Although I do think there are times to be stern, there are times to be angry, there are times to be upset. And unless you have been living underneath a rock, I think everyone can understand or sympathize why someone like me, a black man living in America right now, can be frustrated, can be upset. And I just want to expand on a little bit as to why. But before I get started, a huge disclaimer for a lot of people out there. There are going to be a lot of thoughts and opinions that I express, not just on this topic and the topics to come, but topics in the future. I may have polarizing viewpoints. I may have different viewpoints, and I may be at a position where I'm on a different side of the fence than you are. That being said, I would like to think that anyone who knows me personally and anyone who interacts with me on a regular basis, they know where my heart is. They know me as a person. And I would like to think we can live in a world. We already live in a world. We already live in a country where innocent and or unarmed black and brown men and women are being murdered in cold blood right in front of our face every day. I think it would be even worse to put ourselves in a country where we don't have free speech and we can't openly express our thoughts and opinions. That being said, if you disagree with some of my thoughts and opinions, if you don't understand where I'm coming from, that's okay. That's okay. I won't go after you. I won't attack you. I won't castrate you. I won't police you. You have a right to think and feel whatever you want to think and feel. And you have a right to express that however you choose to. I may disagree with how you go about doing that, but at the end of the day, that's your right. And I would ask that you take a look at yourself and go, hey, just like I have a right to express my opinion, I believe Tim has a right too. And quite honestly, I can be very unapologetic at times when it comes to my opinion, but I also tend to think that I'm fair. I can be as fair as possible, and I can take a step back and be objective. I can take a step back and look at it and go like, hey, even though I don't agree with you, I understand where you're coming from. We'll see how mature these opinions and thoughts can be and how they can be formulated. But at the end of the day, just understand I, just like you, have a voice. And I have a right to voice my opinions and thoughts. And I think this is a great platform to do such. So I want to start by bringing the focus where it needs to be, the attention of where it needs to be. If you don't pay attention to the news, or if you may not be in a community that's as affected right now, a lot of black and brown people, people of African American descent, people of African origins, darker skinned people, however you choose to phrase it, whatever terms you choose to use, are upset right now. They're upset, they're angry, and in some cases they're violent. Me, I share that. I'm in the same boat. I'm upset, I'm angry, I feel uneasy. I've lost hours, moments, seconds, minutes of my days over the past week or so, just sitting back and reflecting about how it feels to be me. You can always sympathize with somebody's plight. but it's tough to empathize with somebody's plight if you're not in their shoes, if you don't walk a similar path. This past week on Monday, almost a week ago today, an unarmed black man by the name of George Floyd was murdered in front of our eyes for the world to see by police, and specifically a white police officer. And although we have seen some progress and some movement since Monday, on the grand scheme of things, we still live in a world where people who look and sound like me are being killed. Let's call it what it is. Let's not sugarcoat it. They're being killed. They're being murdered unjustifiably. And it's pissing a lot of people off. A lot of people are confused, angry, and scared because they don't know if when they get pulled over by the police, if it'll be their last moment on this earth. They have no idea what to expect. They have no idea what to anticipate, and they have no idea what to think. There are also people on the other side of that fence who don't know how to feel or express their thoughts to the people who look or sound like them. And they're also expected to look or behave a certain way. And we're going to get into a lot of that later on in the show. But just to catch everybody up to speed, I'm going to give you a high-level overview here. And I did take some notes. But for those of you who don't know, George Floyd was a 46-year-old African-American man, a black man, who died in Minneapolis, Minnesota on Monday after being handcuffed and pinned to the ground by one white police officer by the name of Derek Chauvin. I believe, I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Last name is Chauv for Victor, I-N. Again, a white police officer. Some people close to the scene caught the whole scene on video because that's the age we live in nowadays. And he was being held down by 4 police officers. The aforementioned Derek Chauvin had his knee for 9 minutes, had his knee pinned on George Floyd's neck to the point where he couldn't breathe, essentially being strangled, pinned down. The other 3 officers had pinned down the rest of his body, and they didn't step in to say, hey, this is wrong, hey, we shouldn't be doing this, whatever the case may be. And although the details surrounding what led up to that are murky and some are still being shared and there are different perspectives out there, one thing is for sure, 2 things for certain. Those police officers were wrong. And there was one additional police officer, and I do apologize, feel free to anyone to fact check me here, as a lot of the details are coming from different areas here, so there may be some inconsistencies in different parts of the internet depending on where you look. But there was an additional police officer who happens, believe it or not, to have been the brother-in-law of the police officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck. But he was the brother-in-law, and he kind of just stood by and watched. And you could see that although he was a bit uncertain, he didn't step in to help George. He didn't voice his opinion. He didn't say, hey guys, what are we doing? We don't do this. This is not how we operate. This is not what we do. So they essentially stood by, watched the murder, again, let's call it what it is, watched the murder of George Floyd, and went on about their business. So another unarmed black man murdered while in the custody of police officers, specifically white police officers. And the reason somebody who looks like me is I can speak to the confusion, I can speak to the anger, and I can speak to the fear. If there are any other emotions that other people who look and sound like me are experiencing right now, I may not necessarily have the words to really expound on any of those emotions outside of these 3. But the reason you're first angry is because you realize that this is so normal. Right? This is just a normal thing. This is just a normal thing. You walk outside, you see birds chirping, you see cars driving, and you see black men getting killed. And that makes me and people who look like me very, very angry. And it has some time that these thoughts are very confusing, right? And you have these thoughts that go through your head that no one ever wants to really get on a public platform and really talk about, because in today's age, this is a topic that we have to be certain about. You have to be certain about what side of the fence you're on. And you have to clearly express those thoughts. Otherwise, if you're this mentality of if you're not for us, you're against us. So you got a lot of people who have these angry, confused, afraid thoughts that they're navigating through. And I know me personally, I had to sit down and think about, how do I feel? Where do I go with these emotions? How do I express these emotions? Do I keep them to myself? Do I vent to close friends and family? Do I get on this platform and say something? And I think this is my most vocal, most productive platform that I have at my disposal, where I can get on, quote unquote, my soapbox and voice my thoughts and opinions out here. And even if this only reaches 5 people, even if this only reaches 10 people, hey, that's 5 or 10 people that are now a little bit more sympathetic to people of color. Hopefully I can paint that picture. Going back to the spectrum of emotions, there's fear. And I think a lot of that is obvious. You have fear like, what is my last moment on this planet? I have no idea. You know, people are very afraid of their own mortality, and things like this take it to the next level. I don't know if I'm walking outside and someone who doesn't look or sound like me can call the cops on me unjustifiably, and that could be my last day on this earth. I don't know if I'll get pulled over for whatever reason will be justified, and if this will be my last day on the earth. I was talking to a really close friend of mine. I consider him a big brother and damn near a father figure earlier today, who's much older than I am. He recently turned, he's in his 50s. I'll just leave it at that. And he's a quasi-successful black man. All of his papers are in order in his vehicle. He lives in a well-off neighborhood. He still gets a sense of apprehension and anxiety when he gets pulled over by the cops. That is something that anyone who is not a person of color, unless you're up to no good, like you got drugs in the car, weapons, whatever, that is something that if you're not a person of color, you will never be able to relate to that feeling. You'll never be able to understand that anxiety that shoots through your toes up to the crown of your head when you see a cop behind you and you're not even doing anything wrong. In your mind, you're operating, you're existing. And I find it very difficult to be a black man in this country where our primary concern is survival. And I can only imagine how specifically a black father, but any parent of black children, what they feel when they send their black kids out into the world. It's one phone call away. You're one phone call away from being the next statistic. You're one phone call away from being the next memorial service. You're one phone call away from the funeral home's next paycheck. One call away. And if that's not scary, I don't know what is. We already deal with things within our own community that are negatively impacting our environment. And it's far from a nurturing environment, but it's dangerous nonetheless. And we go out and we have to worry about our own lives for people who look and sound like us could do harm to us. The last thing that we want to look at is someone who's supposed to protect us and someone who's supposed to look for us just like that has the ability to take our lives in an instant. Just like that. That's scary. That's confusing. You're wearing a badge. You took an oath to protect me, and something like skin color is still a part of the conversation. That's very, very scary. And if you're a person of color who doesn't have to go through that, who doesn't experience that, if you're not a person of color and it's tough for you to understand, the simplest way I can put it is imagine going somewhere where you're told it's the safest place that you can be, and someone is who does not look like you, does not sound like you, but has a responsibility to protect you, is the one doing you harm. And not only are they the one doing you harm, that's the case in every place that you go, whether you're born there or otherwise. That's the place that everywhere that you go, you eventually become a very scared and upset person. You're paranoid unnecessarily. You're overly cautious unnecessarily. And you're afraid unnecessarily. The last emotion that I want to talk about before I check on everyone who tuned into the Facebook Live and Instagram Live, I appreciate you all being patient. I'll get to you all in a second. But the last thought that I want to navigate, the last emotion that I want to navigate that I experienced over the past 6 days is confusion. You want to know why? Why is this happening in 2020? How can people still be racist? How can people still treat someone less? Treat someone at a lower level simply because of the color of their skin? After everything that we've been through, not only as a people, but as a country, how are we still here in 2020? Another level of confusion is, how do I feel about this? I know I'm angry, I know I'm upset, but why? How long do I get to be upset for? How long should I be angry for? How should I express my anger? Where should I go with my anger? You have people who don't look like you, who tell you you don't have a right to be upset because of the things that go on in your own community. You don't have a right to be angry and afraid because of the things that go on through your own community. You have family, friends, and otherwise acquaintances who look and sound like you, who commit violent acts and sell drugs to your community and destroy your community every day. You don't have a right to be upset when a police officer kills someone who looks just like you. You have people who look and sound like you who tell you, hey, you have to be this upset to be black. Your anger level has to be through the charts, through the roof, in order for you to be black, or in order for you to be down for the cause. If you don't express your thoughts right away, if you don't get as upset as I do, if you're not in the streets rioting, if you're not out protesting, if you're not angry, then you're not black. You're not down for the cause. Here's the criteria. You need to do X amount of Facebook or Instagram lives or tweets. You need to have X amount of posts, and here's what your post needs to be about. And if you don't, you're nowhere near as angry as I am. In fact, I'm questioning your blackness. That's confusion all wrapped up in a bubble. And if anyone who's listening to this right now, they don't know how to feel, they hate my guts for sharing my opinion, or you love what I'm saying, regardless of how you feel, understand that confusion is a hell of a beast. It can sway your every thought and emotion, and it can make it very, very difficult and very, very challenging to get in where you fit in. You don't know how to be. You don't know where to go. You don't know what to say. And to some group or some party out there, it's not the right thing. No matter how sincere or how genuine you are, it's not the right thing. So again, to recap, how do I feel? as a black man living in America right now, I feel angry, I feel afraid, and I feel confused. I'm going to hop off real quick, everybody, and check on my Instagram and Facebook followers who are tuning in live, and I'll be back in a couple of moments. Okay, everybody, I'm back, and I really appreciate some of your patience, and you can get in on the fun too. I've been doing this would make the 4th episode in a row, where if you're no stranger to the show, you know these shows are pre-recorded. So how this has been going on prior to episode 37, I believe, is I record these in my apartment, in particular my office. I edit them in my office, I post them for you all to listen and enjoy. And it can be anywhere that you listen to your podcast on, whether that be iHeartRadio, Podchaser, Castbox, YouTube, wherever you go to listen, you can listen. Try to throw in a little twist and record these live on Instagram and Facebook just to add a new level of interactivity. And I think it's been really, really cool. I think it's been moving in the right direction. So you can get in on the fun too. I put all of my social media, with the exception of my Facebook, in the description of every show. So if you want to follow me if you already are a friend of mine on Facebook, or if you want to follow me on Instagram, feel free to. And then the next time I go live, you'll get your notification and you'll be able to tune in and participate. The thing that really has me perplexed about this whole entire situation is the division that's now occurring between people who should be on the same side because of how they choose to express their emotions. And let me shed a little bit of light on what I mean. So yesterday, I got a call from a really, really close friend of mine. May as well be my brother, my good friend Chuck. And I was away from my phone. Believe it or not, anyone that's my age group, you actually can be away from your phone for more than 10 minutes. It's hard, but you can do it. And I was away from my phone. I took a nap because I'm old. I took a nap and I was away from my phone for, let's call it, the better part of 3 hours. And I get a text message. When I finally get my phone, I get a text message from Chuck, and he goes, "Hey, is what's going on today going to be on your show?" And I mean, he means today as in not literally today, but today as in what's going on in the world today. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm recording it tomorrow night, which is today. And I'm like, why? What's up? You want to get in? You want to get interview slot? Like I said, I look out for my people. And he goes, no. And he calls me. And he says, there's looting and rioting going on in the city right now. Now, I've heard about there were protests in Indianapolis. Obviously, the start of the protest happened in Minneapolis. Ooh, say that 5 times fast. You have Chicago, you have LA. So there are different parts of the country where these protests were going on. And now they're in my heart. When it hits home, it's a different level of emotion. It's a different level of excitement. It's a different level of anxiety, of fear, of confusion, of anger. There's a different level. When you see it on the news and you can't reach out and touch it. So there's this thing called the monkey sphere. And anyone who is into psychology knows exactly what I'm talking about. But just in case you're not, an oversimplification of what your monkey sphere is basically your capacity to sympathize or empathize for something. Right now, none of us are thinking about what's going on in Croatia because we're not there. We don't know anybody that's there or may not know anybody that's there. We're not thinking about anything that's going on in the Virgin Islands right now. We're just not there mentally. That's your monkey sphere, your capacity. And again, an oversimplification. But when you turn on the news and you see these things in these different cities where everything is being impacted, your heart bleeds to an extent because it's right in front of you. And even in some cases, I'm not too embarrassed to say, you don't care as much as you would like to. If that makes sense. I think everybody on here right now can at least feel where I'm coming from, where you can watch a story on the news and go, wow, my heart hurts, and you genuinely mean it. But how many times have we seen stories on the news where you go, that's sad, but what else is on? That can sometimes happen when you turn on these protests. I'm sorry, when you turn on these news channels and you see coverage about the protests and rioting in other cities. But when it hits home, it's a different level of emotion. So my friend Chuck tells me, like, yo, turn on the news. So I turn on the news. The first thing we do is we go to like channel 3, which in Philly is KYW. Nothing. We go to 6 ABC. They're talking about the spacecraft launch. We go to channel, I want to say 10. And they were talking about news. The news was on, but they were talking about something else. We go to Fox 29, the only news station that's covering it. And sure enough, they are defacing statues of Frank Rizzo. They are, and when I say they, I just mean the people out there doing it. So for anyone out there, before you get butthurt, I'm not singling out any group of people. I'm just saying they. But the rioters, sounds like a band name with a Z, the rioters. But the rioters are causing destruction across the city. There are cars lit on fire. There are businesses being destroyed and things like that. This is the part of the show where a lot of you may stop listening. This is the part of the show where a lot of you may disagree with what I have to say, can't deal with a difference of opinion, don't know how to process it, so you tune out and turn it off. And that's okay. That's your right. But my first emotion was sadness. My first emotion was being upset. I was upset that people had to feel like they had to do this at this point. I was upset that we're at a point in the country where some people don't feel like peaceful protest is enough, and they have to go out and be violent and riot and loot. I was upset that that was some people's breaking point. That's where some people were. I was upset that that happened. Then I got angry. And I got angry because there are in any situation that's similar to this, you're going to have people who are taking advantage of the situation. And I felt so angry and upset that a lot of the people out in rioting and looting probably, more than likely, could give a damn about George Floyd. And it just frustrated me that the level of destruction came to my city. Now, here's the thing. Whenever you voice an opinion like this, if it's not the popular opinion, if it's not the loudest opinion in the room, oftentimes you can get shunned and ridiculed. And I think two things can be true. You can have emotions about what happened to George Floyd, and you can also have emotions and opinions about the riot. I personally can understand why someone feels like they have to. I personally can understand this is the only way that you feel like you can get your message across. I personally understand being so angry and being so deep in emotional turmoil that you lash out. But I can disagree with how you go about doing that. And if you want to sit here and tell me that I'm not allowed to have an opinion and I'm not allowed to agree or disagree one way or the other about any given topic, I can't have it. It's going to be tough for me to have a discussion with you. If you can take a look at the rioters downtown and have an opinion about it and say, it's about time, hit them where it hurts, this is what we need to do, then I should, in that very same breath, have the same right to say, I can understand why they're doing it, but I don't like it. And I think if anyone needs to backtrack on that opinion, if anyone needs to backtrack after voicing something like that, then we're in scarier times than we realize. For those of you who don't know, there's a really popular black comedian by the name of Desi Banks. He is verified on both Instagram and on Twitter. Desi Banks, I didn't see the tweet because it was since deleted, but I'm going to paraphrase here, and I apologize if I say anything inaccurate. But he says something along the lines of that looting is not the way, rioting is not the way, we can't do this. He had over 1 million followers before that tweet. After that tweet, he had less than 500,000 followers. Meaning more than 500,000 people said, I don't like your opinion, I'm unfollowing you. Now, I want to be very, very clear. That's your right. That's anyone's right. It's your right to tune into this Facebook or Instagram live. It's your right to tune into this podcast and go, you know what? I don't like what you're saying. I don't like what you have to say. I'm going to turn this off. That is your right. That is your privilege. More power to you. I encourage that expression of thought because that is your right. But whenever you get to the point of where like you're like borderline fascist and you're like, you're not allowed to voice your opinion, I think that's another problem in and of itself. People can be equally upset at the unjustified murder of George Floyd and be equally angry at the fact that there are people out here looting and rioting and destroying where we live. Doesn't make them less black. Doesn't mean they're not down for the cause. Doesn't mean that they're not as angry as you. It just means that they choose to express their thoughts differently. I have a little bit more to say about the topic, but you'll hear later on in the show that I interview a really good friend of mine, my brother in more ways than one, Ryan. And I think it was a really productive conversation and it shed some light on both sides of the fence. And I don't want to be productive. I don't want to be redundant. And I don't want to get to the point where you hear the interview twice, in essence. So that'll be towards the end of the show. So towards the end of the episode, you'll hear Ryan and I's discussion. But that said, I feel like we're at a point now where we're being bullies. We're bullying people and telling them and coaxing them into how they need to feel. And I think that it's your right to bully. Do what you want. But don't get mad at me if I don't feel the same way. Don't get mad at me if I'm at a point where I choose to express myself differently. Do not get upset at me. A part of the reason why I'm upset with the riots, I'll go over in a second. I'm going to step away, check on my Instagram and Facebook followers, and I'll be back in a moment. Hey gang, I'm back. And again, I appreciate you giving me some of your time today. So I was just speaking with some of the people who are tuning in live, and I expressed the thought about the rioting and the looting. And I mentioned before the break another aspect of it that really gets me upset. Earlier yesterday, there was a peaceful protest in Philadelphia with thousands of black, white, Asian, brown, Hispanic, whatever ethnic background or cultural group or racial group that you can think of out there protesting peacefully. Got some news coverage. By the time my buddy Chuck told me about the riots, the only thing on the news were the riots. I go on Facebook, not a single one of my friends, and this isn't me coming at anybody, so don't take offense. Or take offense, that's your right. But none of my friends posting about the peaceful protest. I think I saw one post about the peaceful protest. Very few articles going around about the peaceful protest. A ton of watch parties about the riots. A ton of news coverage about the riots. A ton of narratives now being changed regarding the riots and the looting. And although I do agree that it's going to take some people who weren't otherwise impacted and is now impacted, It's going to take them to go, hey, what are they rioting about? There's going to be people out there that go, what are they rioting about? What's the cause of this looting and this destruction? And then it's going to go back to George Floyd. It's going to go back to I Can't Breathe. It's going to go back to Black Lives Matter. And that's where it needs to be. However, there's also going to be a percentage out there of people who can't look past that. It's just going to go, people are looting for what? People are looting and destroying our city for what? And now that's less coverage on George Floyd. It's less coverage on his unjustified murder. It's less coverage of the racist white cop employed by the Minneapolis Police Department and how long it took to get him arrested or convicted. And here's the simplest way I can put it. Let's say you have a lemonade stand. You sell lemonade. People ask you, what's in your lemonade? You tell them what's in your lemonade. Now let's say you start selling cookies. By its very nature, people aren't just coming to you for lemonade anymore. People are now coming to you for cookies. Now people are asking you, how'd you get the cookies? How long does it take to make the cookies? How long have you been selling the cookies? Why are you selling the cookies? Was the lemonade not enough? Very few people are going to go, oh, I see you're selling lemonade and cookies. Very few news stations are going to say, these are George Floyd protests. These are riots, and this is destruction stemming from the unjustified death of George Floyd. Very few. There's now an opportunity for the narrative to be shaped and molded by people who don't look and sound like us. People who want to push a negative narrative now have that power because of the rioting and the looting. Here's an example. Here's what I mean. So I did a little bit of research. ABC News called it protests. They called it George Floyd protests. They had it on there as the header, as the banner, as they showed coverage of the riots. The riot still said George Floyd. The description still said George Floyd. They were still talking about George Floyd. They were still mentioning the unjustified murder in the city of Minneapolis. Fox called it rioting. Now, regardless of how you feel about ABC News, regardless of how you feel about Fox, CNN, regardless of how you feel about any of that, any of those networks, the majority of the networks that I tuned into, the majority of the articles that I tuned into are talking about rioting. No precursor, no context, just rioting. No why, no who, no where. They're just talking about insured buildings. They're talking about people who will get unemployment. And they're talking about damage of property. They're not talking about George Floyd. Earlier today, Entertainment Tonight posted and showed an image of Mayor Justin Cummings, who is the first black mayor in Santa Cruz, California, and the white police commissioner, Andrew Mills, kneeling peacefully with protesters who were peacefully protesting in Santa Cruz. Some people who are for riots and for looting may not agree with that. And there are some people who do agree with it. The point here is that we see that only one news publication that I saw even had it displayed, was even talking about it. Every other news outlet that I've seen had mentions of people apologizing and backtracking their tweets or statements, or rioting. That was all I saw. I saw one publication about peaceful protests and about why they were protesting. Just one. If 10 minutes of a newscast spends 10 minutes talking about George Floyd, and the very next day, a space shuttle launches into space for the first time in a very long time, it's a pretty big deal, and they spend 8 minutes about George Floyd and 2 minutes about that space shuttle. And then the next day, there are riots in one city. Now, the coverage is 5 minutes about George Floyd and 2 minutes about the space shuttle and 3 minutes about the riots. And when you get to the point where there's more coverage about the riots and not why people are rioting, I think we got an issue. I saw one post and it really got me to thinking. There were people out there judging people's anger or opinions on being upset about the rioting. And a few people said that people don't have a right to be upset about inanimate objects. And I had to voice my opinion. And where I stand on that is, you have black store managers at some of these businesses. You have black workers at some of these businesses. That car you lit on fire belongs to a black person. Now consider this dynamic, a dynamic that you may not want to consider because you're pro-riot. And that's your opinion, so be it. That black person now cannot get to work because somebody destroyed their car. What are they supposed to think and feel about the riots now? Do you think that very same person who can't go back to work now because their business was destroyed, or that black business owner who had his windows broken into, are going to go back home and say, yes, it's about time. Good thing. I'm happy for these riots. No, they're going back home and they're upset. They're angry. They're confused because they don't know what to think. They got people who look and sound like them destroying what they own because they're getting lumped in their collateral damage. You can be equally upset. Let me calm down and say you can be equally upset. If I haven't articulated that well enough, let me make another attempt. You can be equally upset. You can be upset at the unjustified murder of black and brown people, specifically George Floyd in this case. And you can be upset at a place that you love and care about being turned on its head. Two things can be true. Now, there are a lot of thoughts and opinions out there about the riots. There are a lot of emotions that people are navigating. And earlier in the episode, I mentioned how I felt as a black man when I got pulled over by the police. And a good friend of mine, Alonzo, we call him Zoe for short, was very pro-black in every sense of the word. And he's a good friend of mine. And I've always respected his view on how he perceives life in general. I think he has a very well-grounded view of how he perceives life. And when George Floyd got murdered, the next day he took to Instagram and Facebook and expressed how he had very similar situations where he was unjustifiably pulled over. And every time he got pulled over, it was the same questions all the time. Do you have any weapons in the car? He was never given any justifiable reason as to why he was pulled over. And reading his story, he felt very much bullied or antagonized by the police. And I can sit here and say, I can understand. I can understand why he felt that way. And it kind of got me to thinking on a deeper level. I believe Alonzo has a child, or at least 2 kids. And if he doesn't, I'm sure he will have kids. Like the many of us who witnessed the unjustified murder of so many black and brown people. we either have kids or we're going to have kids. And now we have a responsibility to teach them, educate them, and influence their perception on how to behave towards white people and how to behave towards police officers in particular. And it really got me to thinking about how huge of a responsibility that is. You're telling another person who eventually will come into their own and have their own thoughts, feelings, and emotions on how to behave for their own survival. The pro there is you're equipping them in advance with some tools that they may need that could mean the difference between a traffic ticket or jail time, or at worst, their life. The con to that is you're now giving them a negative perception from the gate of what a white person or what a cop looks and sounds like. And it's such a tough decision because you don't know what message at times you want to give to the people that you're raising. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there's 3 types of people. You got the type of person that tells you you're crazy for thinking that cops will ever harm you and that cops will ever do anything to put you in danger. And cops are here to protect you. And you're crazy if you think otherwise. Then you have the person on the other end of the spectrum that says, F the police, we coming straight out of the underground. And because I look a certain way, I have to be on edge all of the time. The police are not for me. The police are a racist organization. And I don't want to have anything to do with them. But then you got a person like me. The third type of person. To this day, I have never had a negative experience with a police officer. However, I'm very much aware of the injustices and plights that we go through on a racial level when it comes to authority and when it comes to the executive branch of the United States of America and those who enforce the laws, those who create the laws. I'm very close friends with a lot of police officers. I pray for their safety. I take the time under certain circumstances to reach out to them personally going, hey bro, I do not hate you. I know you're a good person. I know your heart. And I know you have a tough job. But at the same time, I can see what happened to George Floyd and go, that's messed up. And become afraid and become angry. So what do I tell my kids? The irony about, there's irony in everything. And again, these are some thoughts that people won't necessarily express, but I want to be here to be this side of the perception for you all, to just let you into my mind a little bit. We get upset as black and brown people for being categorized and put in one box. And we oftentimes do the same thing. And I don't want to have a discussion on whether what's right or what's wrong, or necessarily if it's justified or not. But I do want to take the opportunity to say perception is reality. I can totally sympathize and understand why if people hate police officers. I can totally understand and sympathize with people who feel like all police officers and police in general, and white people in general, are bad apples. I can sympathize with that. I can understand that. But there's more than one way to looking at life. And I think if you're at a point where you want people to look at things the way you do, and if they don't, you don't want them in your life, and you want to be surrounded with like-minded people who only think and feel the way you do, I think there's room for growth there. You don't want to ever, in any situation in life, be surrounded by a bunch of yes men or yes women. You want to have that one friend or family member who's willing to come to you and tell you, hey, I don't feel that way. Or why do you feel that way? Because if you get around people who look and think and feel like you all the time, you're going to end up being a very narrow-minded individual, and the people that you're responsible for teaching and educating, whether it be your teacher, whether it be your mentor, a leader, or a parent, they're going to pick up that very same mindset. Very, very same mindset. Okay, guys, I'm going to take one more quick break. We're going to get back into it, and then we're going to talk about the interview in just a second. Hey, gang, I'm back. That was the last break, so this is going to be straight through. That being said, just to recap all of the thoughts that I had here, and feel free to run this back. I want to be very, very clear. What happened to George Floyd was unacceptable, and I will be following it very closely. And if I come off a little angry, if I come off a little upset, it's because it touched me personally, and I will argue, how can it not? I'm also very upset at the destruction that come to my city and cities across the country, and I don't agree with it, but I understand it. If you feel like you got a riot, I understand it. I don't agree with it. If you are saying that me or anyone else is less black or is less angry because we don't agree with the rioting, I think you really should take a step back and look at your own opinions and values, and don't judge me on your standards of emotion. And finally, to all of those out there taking advantage of the situation and exploiting the rioting for a free iPod, for free Jordans, or for that free blouse at H&M, I say shame on you. But you probably don't care because you're probably not listening. So hey, if you know somebody who's rioting, tell them. Tim said, shame on you. I'm sure it'll hit them where it hurts. Finally, a segment that has been away for quite a bit. I do have an interview coming up. And for everyone watching on Instagram and Facebook Live, you won't get to see this part of it because all interviews are pre-recorded. And they are later on, spliced into the episode. So I encourage you to tune into the final episode. I'll post the link so that way you can hear the interview. But there's a good friend of mine by the name of Ryan. You all know Ryan. He was on the show before, and he's a huge influencer of the show. Quite arguably, I wouldn't even have the show if it wasn't for him. So it was nice to spend a little bit of time with him. And I encourage you all to listen to the conversation because I felt that it was very productive. And not to be redundant, because I do say it towards the end of the interview, I personally feel that if you can have a productive conversation with somebody who may have different opinions than you have, and you can come out of that and still break bread with that very same person, I think it says a lot about your character and that person's character. I think it's very immature, and I'll even go as far as to say it's childlike if you don't like what somebody says, so you want to distance yourself from them. Unless it's morally or ethically wrong, unless the person is committing a crime, we're not robots. We're not all programmed the same way. We're allowed to think and feel differently than you. And if you're so entitled and so arrogant and so self-centered to think that your opinion is the only one that matters, I really don't want you listening anyway. And that's just me being real. Because the whole point of this show is to discuss maybe not so popular opinions. It's an opinionated show. It's to discuss different perspectives. And hell, tell you what, if you disagree with me, if you disagree with any of my points, if maybe there's a perspective that you think that I'm not considering, reach out to me. I'm a very civil person. If you don't want to be featured on the show to voice your opinion, send me an email. Hey, that's how you know when you truly made it, when you get hate mail, right? I haven't gotten any yet. Be the first person to send me hate mail. That's how I know I made it. But more specifically, at least you gotta. I mean, I'll read your response on the show, unless of course there's profanity in it. I don't shy away from confrontation as long as that confrontation can be productive. So if you disagree with what I have to say, feel free to reach out and we can go from there. That being said, everybody, sit back, enjoy the interview, and I'll talk to you on the other side of it.
Hey, everybody. This time around, we have Ryan on the show, really good friend of mine and a longtime listener and supporter of the show. In fact, if it wasn't for Ryan, arguably, I wouldn't even have a show. So, Ryan, it's great to have you on. My brother in more ways than one. Those who know, know. It's good to have you, man.
Yeah, it's good to be here, brother. It's good to be here. It's always a pleasure. You know that.
So, before we dive into our talking points, Ryan, in general, because I haven't spoken to you since the whole thing occurred, outside of a few text messages, what are your thoughts in general about George Floyd and, him having his life taken away, just in general, as a black man in America, as a young black man in America? Just give me an insight to some of your thoughts and how you feel.
I mean, it's concerning. It's something that, I worry about being a black man, being someone who wants to have a family one day, and have, my black child, son or daughter in this, growing up in this world. It's concerning because I don't feel as though, our protection is a priority. And when I say our protection, I mean me as protection as me being a black person in America. I feel like almost like we're separated from everyone else. And it's like, it almost brings on this feeling of the cops feel like they have to protect everyone else from us. And that's a scary feeling.
Wow.
And it's a sad feeling because, it's almost like people are being raised to fear us. And that's just, that's sad because that's just not who we are. That's not what we want to be. Black people in general are very loving, passionate, and forgiving people. So for us to be viewed in America or have the feeling that we're viewed in America as a criminal automatically and a threat when we haven't done anything, it's a pretty sad feeling to be viewed that way.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And what you just said was really powerful. It spoke to me that you feel like not only are the police not protecting us in general, the perception or at least the feeling is that they feel like they have to protect other people from us. And that's huge. And I'm sure there are other people, especially now more than ever, that feel that way. So much so where they had an emotional response, and now we have things like riots and such going on. And right now that's where the narrative is. And I'm going to be honest with you, Ryan, a part of me didn't want to talk about it. A part of me didn't want to contradict myself or seem like a hypocrite and say, hey, this changes the narrative, and now I'm turning around and I'm talking about it, But I think I owe people like you and whoever else listens to the show an opportunity to hear our perspective and our opinions about it. So that's the route we're going to go. And to start from the top here, what are your thoughts in general about whenever riots occur as a cause of injustice or unjustified murders of black and brown people?
So I'll start by saying this. I don't condone, I guess would be the best word, riots. I don't think that, I don't want that to happen. I don't want, stores to be looted and cars to be burnt up. I don't want that to happen. But at the same time, I ask, what is the answer, right? Because it's like when Colin Kaepernick took a knee for police injustices, we were told, no, don't do that. You can no longer have a job now because you took a knee during the national anthem. We were told that we can't protest during the national anthem. Find another way to protest. We have basketball players who wearing the I Can't Breathe shirts after that incident happened. And then they were told to just shut up and play basketball. So it's almost like every time an injustice occurs and we try to say, hey, listen, we just want this to stop. We just want justice in some form. We get told that we're either asking too much or asking for it the wrong way. And so it gets to a point where you feel boxed in a corner because you keep asking and you keep trying to conform to the way you want me to ask, but then nothing happens, nothing changes. One of the notable things about that video that struck me and that really saddened me when the officer's knee was in the back of his neck is that he almost smirked a little bit. Like he was smirking and it just had this look of like, I'm going to get away with it. Like, it wasn't a big deal to him. And so at what point is enough enough? And what point do we say, okay, we've had enough of the injustices, and we're now going to show you that we're done? And I think that that's what we've come to, and I can't blame anyone who feels so hurt and afraid and scared that this is what they feel as though their last resort is to do, because nothing else has worked. So to sum it up, I don't condone it, but at the end of the day, I don't want it to happen, but at the end of the day, what else is there for us to do when we've tried other routes and they just haven't worked?
I can understand that sentiment, and I can definitely understand anyone who feels that way. How many times have we, as children even, whenever we try to voice our opinion and we get told by adults, no, you don't voice your opinion that way, that we lash out, and as a kid it's called a temper tantrum. Of course, that's an oversimplification of it, but I think the idea is still the same there. You know, hey, I tried to voice my opinion. To your point, I tried to conform to the best form of communication that I've been given by you, and it's not working, or it doesn't seem to be working. And then, you know, it's like, what else can I do? So, right, I do get that. I do understand that. Do you feel that it's justified or necessary to get a point across? What do you think are the pros or cons, the pros and cons to rioting?
The pro is, I want you to hear me, and you're going to hear me. And I'm tired of speaking and you not hearing me. That's the pro. The con, and the biggest con, and one of the biggest takeaways I've seen from this, another one of the things that upsets me the most that I think is being overlooked is the division among the people who want the same goal, right? So we have people who want the same goal. We all want equality. We all want justice. I mean, some people don't, but we're not talking about them. But it's like we all want to be treated fairly and to feel like we live in a just society. But when you have people who are pro-riot, we'll say, for lack of a better term, and then you have others who aren't, the tug of war between those two is creating its own battle, and we're almost taking away from why we're here in the first place. So the pro is, I'm going to make so much noise that you can't help but see me, and I do believe that has happened. But the con is those who aren't on board with this plan, because it is an extreme one. And I don't even want to call it a plan per se, because I don't know. I kind of just see this. I don't know. I don't see any leaders saying this is what we're going to do today. I just see these things sort of just start to form. I just feel like when we don't see eye to eye on how we're going to handle the situation, and it's drawing a divide between us, I think that's our biggest issue that, I think that we're all overlooking, and that needs to be addressed as well.
I agree. And those are two pretty good points. I just want to key in on something that you said specifically, and about a new battle occurring between those who, so again, lack of a better term, pro-riot, and those who are anti-riot. I think at the core, at the foundation of this new battle, you have the pro-rioters going, we don't know how else to be heard, so this is what we're going to do to be heard. And the perception from the ones who are anti, or at least how they're receiving it, is, if we don't agree with the way that you're rioting or expressing yourself, then we're not black enough and we're not down for the cause.
Can I answer that?
Sure. I just want to finish.
Sure.
I just want to finish the thought. On the inverse of that, I think the anti-rioters, people who are anti-rioting, they want to peacefully protest or express themselves in however way they choose to express themselves. And the pro-rioters' perception is, you don't care enough about the cause because you're still doing that same thing that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And I think because both sides aren't willing to have a productive conversation to try to find an understanding, that both of them can occur. Unfortunately, they're so opposite in nature that they can't occur at the same time. So I think that's where that risk comes from. Mm-hmm. But with that, I do want to give you the opportunity to respond.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 100% agree. And honestly, a lot of times where there be racial divides or whatever, this divide that's going on now between, you know, the pro and anti-rioters, it's always that like I'm not hearing what you're saying, right? So that's why I appreciate platforms like this where, you know, I get to say, you know, my side of the story, and then I get to hear someone else's side of the story, and it not be a volatile back and forth, but it's just me getting my thoughts out in a manner that hopefully you can understand. If you, not you, but you know, someone can understand if they're on the opposite end of the spectrum, and then vice versa for me. So I do appreciate that. But to answer your question and to respond to what you said, I think the reason the divide is so separate outside of that is because there's a disconnect in terms of how the other one's feeling, right? So people who are okay with the riots and are backing the riots and are saying this is what we need, that's because, this is just my opinion, but I think that's because they hurt so bad. They are hurting so bad with what's happening, and and this is like their outcry. This is, you know, I'm sure you've heard the saying, riots are the language of the unheard or something along those lines. And so I feel like people who are pro-rioting or are rioting and are pro the riots, I think they're just so upset and so hurt that they don't care anymore. You know, I put it to you like this. It's like if I walked up to a person and slapped them every day, 9 o'clock in the morning, I saw you, I slapped you. And then you said to me, can you please stop slapping me? I said, okay. And then the next morning I came, I slapped you again. And then the next day, and then you said, please stop slapping me. I said, okay. And then I slapped you again. And then when you said it, and then when you said the third time, please stop slapping me, not only do I say I'm not going to stop slapping you, but I don't like the way you're asking me to stop slapping you. I'm so offended now that I'm going to do whatever I got to do to get you to stop slapping me. And in my humble opinion, I feel like the people who are, look, we shouldn't be doing this. You know, there are other ways we can do this. We should be peaceful about it. I feel like they just maybe don't, it's not that they're not black enough. We're not Joe Biden. We don't have the authority to say who's black and who's not, right?
Only Joe Biden has that authority. We do not.
Exactly. Only Joe.
Only Joe.
But, so I'm not going to say that they're not black, but I just feel like that same outrage, they just don't feel that same anger. They just don't feel that same connection. Maybe they feel that same sadness. And of course they feel that same remorse. But I feel like if the concern is this Target store, which is insured, is now burned down, which will be rebuilt and won't cost anyone except the insurance company money. And I could be wrong. Someone correct me if I am wrong about that. But I just don't see why that's more important than finally being heard and finally being, acknowledged that this is a problem and we're tired of it and we want it to stop. And so I think that's where the disconnect is. I feel like the people who, and I don't want to group all together, but in general, the people who are like, stop rioting, leave Sears alone, leave Target alone, I just feel like they aren't as hurt as someone who wants to riot. Because here's my thing. No one wants to just riot. No one wants to just kick in a window and just grab some sneakers. If so, that would be happening, and that would just be happening. That would be happening all day, every day. I don't think people are using this cause to say, hey, look, another black man died. Let me go get some sneaks real quick. I just don't think that's what's happening. I don't think that anyone truly believes that that's what's really happening here. But that's how we're being treated. That's how it's being treated. The people who are pro-riot, it's like, you're just doing this for some sneakers. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm doing this because I want to be heard and no one's hearing me. And so that's the disconnect, I think, that, I think when people start to see that a little bit and just understand the feeling a little bit more, I think then we'll be a little bit closer in seeing eye to eye.
Well, to respond to that, I think a part of the reason that that's the perception for people who have been rioting or pro-rioting have that perception is a lot of people who fall into that category forget one key thing, or at least aren't willing to consider one key thing, and that's two things can be true. I don't like how people on the writing perspective are dictating how I have to respond. I can choose to both care about George Floyd and be heartened and be angry and confused and be sad about that entire situation and be afraid every day I walk out of my house, and also dislike rioting. Two things can be true. And I think when you voice that opinion, we live in an age now we got to police your own thoughts. I think when you voice that opinion, the people who are pro-riot go, well, you can't possibly be as black, or you can't possibly care or be as angry as I can. The example, to stick with your example about the person slapping somebody, if you were a bully and you're bullying me and you're bullying the person next to me and the person next to me are two different people. But because the person next to me decides to lash out and hit you in the face, you as the bully are telling me, oh, Johnny was angrier than Tim because Johnny hit me and Tim did. So you're using the barometer of violence. I'm sorry, you're using the violence or rioting as the barometer for anger. And I think people express anger and emotion differently. That's why you have some people who beat their domestic partner and some people who don't. That's why you have some people who go out and get a job and some people who are willing to stick somebody up for a quick buck. That's why you have people different expression of self. People express their thoughts and emotions different ways. You know me personally, to get away from generalizing. You know me personally. You know it takes damn near a lot to get me upset. And we could argue that, honestly, if somebody hit me, I may not even hit them back because that's just the type of person I am. I have a good handle for my emotion. Does that mean I'm not angry? Does that mean I'm not hurt? Does that mean I'm not confused? You know, damn, why did Ryan hit me? No, all of that can still happen, and just I choose to express it differently. So if you want to talk about disconnect, I think that's the disconnect from the other side. I think you did a great job of articulating why the people who are pro-riot are either unwilling to hear or listen to the people who are anti-riot. But I think the perspective I just shared is the idea why the people who are anti-riot aren't as being as receptive to the people who are rioting. I genuinely do feel that two things can be true. And to respond to the thing about you said, to respond to the point about no one wants to just riot, I disagree to a point. I agree with the intent. A lot of the people who are out rioting nowadays in Minnesota, in Chicago, in LA, and unfortunately now in our hometown of Philadelphia, they may not be the day-to-day rioter, let's call it. They may not be a professional full-time rioter. However, I think it'd be pretty naive to sit here and say that there aren't at least a percentage of people who are going, let me run into that Apple store and get that MacBook that I wanted.
Sure.
I had a discussion with my girlfriend earlier about the people who were looting the Apple store and just the people who were rioting and looting in general. And my biggest issue about it is just the message that's being put out there. And I would love to get a response to you, and I don't want to keep you for too long, so I guess we'll put a cap on it after that. But here's my perspective, and I would love to hear your thoughts. So I think the message is really important. When you go and riot, when you go and destroy property, when you go and inflict violence upon other people just because they have a different opinion than you, when you go and do that thing, you got to keep in mind what's the message. If there are a bunch of people out there with Justice for George Floyd shirts, with I Can't Breathe shirts, spray painting and tagging everywhere with I Can't Breathe, Justice for George Floyd, et cetera, there's no question what the message is. It's not really left up to anybody to interpret. Okay, these people are angry about what happened. But when there's no clear message, you get two groups of people. You get one group of people that says these people are knuckleheads and they're taking advantage of the situation because they just want to get some sneakers or they just want a MacBook. But then you have the other group of a second group of people who go, this is what I'm talking about. We need to hit them where it hurts. We need to be heard, and this will get their attention. Our message will definitely be heard. And I think that if you're going to express yourself in this way, and I can understand being angry. If you're angry, if you're upset, it's not a rational reaction. So I can understand that maybe there isn't necessarily a fixed direction there. But I think if you don't clearly tag what your message is, you create the opportunity for it to be misinterpreted, especially when you can't already control how people take things. The last thing I'll say before I get your thoughts, there were two banks across the street from each other in downtown Philly that got vandalized. There was a Citizens Bank and there was a Chase Bank. The Citizens Bank just had the glass broken into, and that's it. Who knows what the damage inside looks like? From the outside looking in, looks like rioting, looting, whatever the case may be. On the Chase Bank, I don't recall there being any windows broken. However, someone took spray paint and spray painted all over the building. I can't breathe. So from the outside looking in, I would like to use that Citizens Bank and that Chase Bank as representations, as hypothetical representations of the two groups of people right now. The Citizens Bank that's just broken into, the perspective is, what's your message here? I don't know what you did, so now I can impose my own message. You did that because you wanted to rob somebody of money. On the Chase Bank, you got, I can't breathe. So from the outside looking in, even if I wasn't familiar with the I can't breathe statement or the Black Lives Matter movement, I can at least look at that and go, what is that about? And kind of like go from there, because the message from there is a little bit clearer than that Citizens Bank. So I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to that, and I guess kind of like what your thoughts surrounding that perspective are.
Sure. So first, let me say this. When you're dealing with thousands and tens of thousands, I don't even know what the official numbers were, but when you're dealing with large groups of people, to that magnitude, I think I don't want to say obviously, but it's almost impossible to not have people who are going to have their own ulterior motives try to take advantage of the situation. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can really do about that. It's an unfortunate occurrence when we're trying to achieve another goal here or a higher goal here. So it's unfortunate, but you're right. Of course, you're going to have some people that just want to take advantage of the opportunity. I'm sorry about that. I also don't care, if I'm going to be quite honest. I really don't, because to me, the injustice that we're facing and continue to face is just more important. And I'll piggyback what I just said to lead me into the second response in terms of not understanding the message. If you don't get why this is happening, you don't want to. That's really, I don't think I can put it any other way. I think this is happening because we continue to say there are injustices, and we continue, and the response to that is continuously, you're telling us about your injustices the wrong way. And so, and not only that, we're ignoring it. So, again, you have people who are just angry, who are lashing out, and when there's looting and rioting and things of this nature, it's not really like, it's hard to have it to such a controlled manner where, there's not going to be some chaos. And let me say this, I think they're investigating how the protests got violent and got to the point that they were, because in Philadelphia, for the first few hours, it was peaceful. There was nothing going on. So I do want to point that out.
100%.
Peaceful. you know. So I think that
100%.
has to be, that has to be, you know, I guess when more information comes out and they figure that out and that gets released, I think that's an important thing to take into consideration as well. But just to piggyback and to wrap it up, at the end of the day, we all know what happened. And at the end of the day, we all know what the story is, because it's the same old story we've been living for years and generations. And at the beginning of every rally, at the beginning of every protest, it's signs saying, I can't breathe. It's signs saying, you know, George Floyd. It's signs saying justice for George Floyd. Like, it's signs, like, you know why we're here. If you want to then say, oh, look, they're doing X, Y, Z, that's just because you don't want to face the reality of what's going on. And I think that goes back to the fact that it just doesn't affect that person. It just doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't affect that person, but the disconnect in terms of how much it hurts, you know, I think is there. And let me just say this. It's not, just because you don't think that rioting is the answer doesn't mean that you're not as black or that you're not as angry. But I ask anyone who says rioting and looting and this is not the answer, I ask you to tell me what is the answer. And I don't want an answer that we've been doing that hasn't been working. And so anyone who is, you know, who doesn't want to take part in that, I get it. You know, I don't want to be down there, but I'm not angry at the people who do want to be down there. So just to sum it all up, you know, wrap it all up, we are not trying to cause disruption in the world. We don't want to just see the world burn. We just want justice and fair trial in it. And we, I think at this point, just aren't going to take anything less than equality at this point. And I think that's just where we are. And I think people are so upset now that it's either take it this way, like I'm not adjusting anymore. This is how we're presenting you our issue. You can take it, or we're going to continue to mess stuff up. And maybe that's not the right answer. Maybe it is the wrong answer. I don't know. My only goal on your show is just to kind of express how we got here and why we feel as angry as we feel. Hopefully I demonstrated that today.
I think you definitely continue the discussion, and I think this discussion in general will help to shine light on two different perspectives. I think you and I are in line on specific things. I think you and I feel a little bit differently about some other areas. And for the sake of redundancy, I won't talk about them here because we all know that the interviews are recorded before the show is, and the interview usually goes towards the back half of the show. And I'm sure at this point, by the time people hear this interview, I would have expressed a little bit more thoughts before the interview even occurs. But I will say that it's really important for people like you and I who know each other personally, and for people who don't know each other personally, to understand that it's okay to have a difference of opinion. I think although this discussion was very productive, this could have went a different way. We could have been cursing each other out. We could have been yelling at each other. But I bet my bottom dollar that even if the discussion did go that way, we'd be willing to pick up and share a beer with each other.
Yes,
and
sir.
I think at the end of the day, that's what we need to see more of. I don't want to ever live in a place. I don't want to live in a place where black people get killed for no reason. And I live there now. I don't want to live in a place where we are also unable to voice our opinion without being castrated. So I encourage anyone with an opinion, whether I agree with it or not, whether it's justified or not, whether it's irrational or not. You get on your soapbox, do whatever you need to do to make you feel well, as long as you aren't being destructive or inciting violence towards anybody in particular. Do what you got to do. Because at the end of the day, we are our voice, and our voice is us. Well, Ryan, thank you for some of your time. Thank you for a slice of your time. I really appreciate it. It's always great when we come together and have a discussion, and you know how I feel. I can't wait to have you on the show again.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, man, like you said, it's always going to be love, brother. So, you know, anytime.
Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that interview. And If you don't know, I'll tell you, all my interviews are conducted over the phone, especially now more than ever. So if you're sitting there wondering like, hey, that sounds different, or the audio quality was different, well, that's because it was over the phone. So just to add some clarity there. But I appreciate everybody tuning in. I appreciate some of your time. And there's one last thing that I want to say before I let you all go. Another area about this whole thing that I find very interesting and even ironic to a degree is Black people, Black culture, and other cultures as well are very protective. We want to police our own community. We want to hold our own people accountable, but we don't do a great job of it. How many of us have a family member, relative, otherwise acquaintance or friend who we know sell drugs? We know that they are performing illegal activities, and we don't approve of it. We tell them they should stop. We tell them it's dangerous. We tell them they'll get caught, and that they shouldn't be selling drugs out of grandmom's basement, etc., etc. But we don't report them to the authorities. We just expect them to just stop or get their life together and get their act around, turn their act around. And the instant a police officer knocks on our door, the instant a police officer questions us about that said family member or friend or acquaintance, the first thing we do is, oh, I don't know anything about that. You know, we tell a story, we lie, we fib, whatever you want to say, we stretch the truth. And we don't reveal that part of that illegal activity. A lot of Black people who may listen to this episode can relate to what I say is we want to protect our own, but at the same time hold our own accountable to a degree. The irony in that is we can't understand when cops protect each other, when we protect our own people. Anyone who looks and sounds like you or wears what you wear, you are a little bit more willing to protect them than you are someone who does not fit that description. There are a lot of people out there who don't look like me, who don't sound like me, and they have an opinion too. Some people feel like that they're not allowed to have an opinion because they're not Black or brown. Some people out there feel like that they're not allowed to have an opinion because they're not a man. There are a lot of people out there who feel like they don't have an opinion because they don't live in Minneapolis and they weren't in George Floyd's shoes or Trayvon Martin's shoes or any unarmed Black man's shoes. Everybody has a right to have an opinion. There's people out there who are afraid to voice their opinion because you have people who are bullies. Don't be a bully. Encourage open communication. Encourage an open forum. And if you don't want to hear anybody else's opinion other than your own, then you should stay inside. You should quarantine even after when all of this is over. That being said, I'm sorry if this episode was a little bit more charged and a little bit more emotional than episodes in the past, but it's the big 4-0, man. It's the big 40. Can y'all believe that? 40 episodes in? How about that? And it's a sensitive topic that I'm passionate about. So, forgive me. Forgive me for being human. I'll see you all on the other side. And as always, I'll keep talking if you'll listen. Take care.